The thing nobody tells you about old apartment buildings is that they all have their own way of panicking. New buildings beep politely when something goes wrong. Our building screamed like it had just seen a ghost in the laundry room. It was a little after midnight when the fire alarm went off, and I came awake so fast I knocked a book off my nightstand and stepped directly onto the corner of it. That was how I ended up limping into the hallway in sweatpants, one sock, and the kind of sweatshirt a man only wears when he has completely given up on being admired after 10 p.m. Across the hall, Mara Whitcomb opened her door at the exact same time, hair twisted into a messy knot, eyes narrowed at the ceiling like she was personally offended by noise. She was wearing thin gray sleep shorts, an oversized theater festival t-shirt, and the expression of a woman who had been pulled out of a dream where people respected her schedule. "If this is another false alarm," she said, "I'm writing a strongly worded letter to the concept of electricity." I told her I would sign it as a witness, and then we both started down the stairs with everyone else, half awake and pretending we were calmer than we were. By the time we reached the courtyard, the drizzle had started. Not real rain, just that cold Cincinnati mist that gets under your collar and makes you question every decision that led you outdoors. The courtyard lights flickered over a collection of irritated tenants. Mr. Alvarez from 2B in slippers, the grad students from the 4th floor wrapped in one blanket like a three-headed ghost, and Mrs. Hanley holding her cat carrier while the cat inside judged all of us. Mara stood near the iron gate with her arms folded tight, bouncing slightly on her bare heels against the damp pavement. She tried to look annoyed instead of cold. Mara was very good at that, turning discomfort into sarcasm before anyone could offer help. I had known her for about 8 months by then, long enough to understand that if she said she was fine, it usually meant she was 5 minutes away from turning blue, but would rather lose a toe than admit weakness. I looked at her t-shirt, then at the drizzle collecting in her hair, then at my jacket. It was the dark canvas one I kept by the door, the kind with a ripped inside pocket and a collar that never sat right. Before I could talk myself out of it, I stepped beside her and put it around her shoulders. She looked down at the jacket, then up at me, surprised in a way that almost made me regret it. Not because she looked offended, because she looked touched, and touched was harder to survive. "Evan," she said, pulling the front closed with both hands, "you're going to freeze." I shrugged like my teeth were not already considering betrayal. I restore audio for a living. I'm basically built for suffering quietly in bad conditions. That got the corner of her mouth to move. Mara had a smile that never arrived all at once. First the mouth, then the eyes, if you earned it. Most people got the first part. I had spent months pretending I did not care how often I got both. She tucked her chin into the collar and said the jacket smelled like coffee, old paper, and whatever sadness lived inside men who owned too many extension cords. I told her extension cords were the backbone of civilization, and she gave me that small look she had, half teasing, half warm, the look that made ordinary air feel like it had been charged. We were neighbors, which sounded simple until you tried to define it. Mara lived in 3C, I lived in 3D, and between us was 6 feet of hallway, one unreliable elevator, and a growing collection of things neither of us called intimacy. She borrowed my screwdriver once and returned it with a sticky note that said, "This survived Theater Tech Week. Respect it." I watered her basil while she was out of town, even though the basil died anyway, and she accused me of committing herb negligence. She knocked on my door when the hallway window jammed during storms because apparently I looked like a man who understood old latches. I pretended not to hear her coming home late from rehearsals, and she pretended not to know I worked past midnight with old jazz playing softly through my door. It was a very careful friendship, built out of small favors and jokes in the stairwell. Safe, I had told myself more than once. Mara was across the hall. Mara was not a possibility. Mara was the woman who rolled her eyes at my terrible grocery bags and somehow knew when I had forgotten dinner. You do not ruin the only peaceful part of your building because a woman looks good in your jacket at midnight. The alarm kept blaring, then cutting out, then blaring again like it had commitment issues. A maintenance guy finally came through the courtyard saying something about a sensor in the basement and asking everyone to stay outside a little longer. People groaned. Mara leaned closer to me without seeming to notice she had done it. Or maybe she noticed and trusted me not to make it strange. That was worse, in a way. Her shoulder brushed my arm through the jacket, and I became very interested in the cracked pavement near my shoes. She followed my gaze and said, "You always do that." I asked what she meant because apparently I had learned nothing from every dangerous conversation I had ever survived. She said I looked away when I was being kind, like I thought kindness became less obvious if I refused to watch it land. I tried to joke that this was a very aggressive review of my personality for 12:17 in the morning, but the words came out quieter than I meant them to. Mara did not answer right away. She looked toward the building, its brick face wet and dark, all our little apartment windows glowing like tired eyes. The jacket swallowed her a little at the shoulders, making her look smaller than she usually allowed herself to appear. Mara was a stage manager, which meant her normal energy was command, lists, tape marks, emergency batteries, and the ability to terrify grown actors with a clipboard. But standing there in my jacket, with her hair damp against her cheek, she looked less like someone running the room and more like someone trying not to ask for one. She pulled the sleeve over one hand and said, almost casually, that she might keep the jacket until morning if I was not too emotionally attached to it. I told her the jacket and I had a complicated history, but were currently seeing other people. She smiled, but it faded before it reached her eyes. Then she asked it, "Would you miss me if I left?" For a second, I thought she meant the courtyard, like if she walked back inside early and risked death by faulty basement sensor, would I mourn responsibly? But she was not looking at the building anymore. She was looking at me. The drizzle tapped softly against the leaves of the skinny tree near the gate, and the alarm had finally stopped, leaving a ringing silence behind it. I could hear Mr. Alvarez muttering to someone about rent prices. I could hear the cat scratching inside Mrs. Hanley's carrier. I could hear my own pulse doing something deeply unprofessional. I asked her what she meant, though I already knew enough to be afraid of the answer. Mara breathed out a laugh that had no humor in it and looked down at the sleeves of my jacket covering her hands. "Nothing dramatic," she said, "just a question." But it was not just a question. Questions like that do not arrive after midnight wearing your clothes unless they have been sitting inside someone for a while. I tried to give her something easy. I told her the hallway would be quieter without her threatening the elevator. She nodded like she had expected, that like humor was the door I always escaped through. "So that's a yes?" she asked. I said of course it was a yes, and that should have been enough for neighbors. It should have been enough for two people who borrowed tools and shared weather complaints and stood on opposite sides of a line neither had drawn out loud. But Mara kept looking at me, and under the teasing there was something open and almost scared. The kind of look that asks you not to lie just because lying would keep things comfortable. I wanted to ask if she was going somewhere. I wanted to ask why the thought of her leaving had made the courtyard tilt under my feet. Instead, I stood there in the cold with my hands shoved into my pockets, acting like I had not spent months learning the sound of her key in the lock. When the maintenance guy finally waved us back inside, everyone moved at once, grateful and grumbling. Mara did not take off my jacket. She walked beside me up the stairs, close enough that our arms brushed on every other step, and neither of us made a joke about it. On the third-floor landing, the hallway was warm and yellow and familiar, with its crooked runner rug and the little table where people left mail they were pretending was not theirs. Our doors faced each other like they always had. Nothing had changed, except everything had become louder. Mara stopped outside 3C and turned toward me, still wrapped in my jacket. She said she would bring it back in the morning unless I planned to file a missing persons report before breakfast. I told her I could wait until noon if she sent proof of life. She smiled then. The full one, the one that made me forget what I had been trying to protect. Her hand was already on her doorknob when I finally asked if she was leaving. Mara went still, not dramatically, just enough that I knew I had hit the real question hiding under the first one. She looked at my door, then at me, and for once, she did not hide behind a joke fast enough. "Maybe," she said. "I might not be across the hall much longer." Then she slipped into her apartment, wearing my jacket, and the door closed softly between us, leaving me standing in the hallway with cold arms, damp hair, and absolutely no idea how to answer the question she had really asked. I did not sleep much after that. It was not because the alarm had ruined the night, though my body definitely believed any noise from the hallway might be the building deciding to perform an encore. It was because of Mara's question. The way she had asked it, the way she had stood there in my jacket like she was borrowing warmth, but really testing whether I would notice the empty space she might leave behind. Around 3 in the morning, I heard her door open quietly across the hall. Then I heard nothing else. just the old floorboards settling and the faintest sound of her lock turning again. I told myself not to read meaning into apartment noises, which was rich coming from a man who restored damaged recordings for a living and spent most of his working hours pulling hidden meaning out of static. By morning, I had replayed the whole scene so many times that even my coffee looked disappointed in me. At 9:30, someone knocked on my door. I opened it too fast, which was the first mistake. Mara stood there, holding my jacket, folded over both arms, like she was returning a borrowed dog. She had changed into jeans, a black sweater, and boots, her hair still damp from a shower and twisted behind one ear with a pencil, because apparently Mara believed hair accessories should also be office supplies. "Before you accuse me of theft," she said, "I brought it back voluntarily." I told her I had already contacted federal authorities, but I would consider reducing the charges if the jacket had been treated well. She looked down at it and smoothed one sleeve with her thumb. A small gesture that should not have done anything to me and absolutely did. "It was a perfect gentleman," she said, a little emotionally unavailable, but warm. I took it from her, and for one ridiculous second, my hand brushed hers, and the hallway went too quiet around us. The jacket smelled faintly different. Not perfume exactly. Mara did not wear the kind of perfume that announced itself before she entered a room. It smelled like black tea, sawdust from the theater, cold air, and whatever soap she used that made me think of clean cotton and trouble. I folded it over my arm because putting it on immediately felt too intimate, like admitting I had noticed. Mara noticed me noticing, of course. She leaned one shoulder against the doorframe and said, "You're doing your silent analysis face." I told her I only had one face before coffee. She said, "No, this one was different. This was the face I made when an audio file had a hidden second voice in the background. That stopped me more than I wanted it to." I asked how she knew that, and she shrugged like she had not just revealed she knew the private weather patterns of my workday. "Your speakers leak through the wall a little," she said. "Not enough to understand everything. Just enough to know when you replay the same 5 seconds 20 times because something's bothering you." I should have made a joke. That was usually my method of survival with Mara. Instead, I stood there with my jacket over one arm and realized she had been listening to my life in the same careful way I had been listening to hers. I knew the sound of her coming home from rehearsals, the heavy drop of her bag, the way she sometimes stood in the hallway for a second before opening her door, like she needed to become alone before entering her own apartment. I knew she sang badly when she painted set pieces because once she had left her window cracked and the courtyard had been treated to a tragic version of Fleetwood Mac. I knew she bought oranges on Thursdays and forgot them until Sunday. But I had told myself those details did not mean anything. They were just neighbor facts. Apparently, Mara had been collecting her own. She nodded toward the end of the hallway, where the old window above the stairwell was rattling again. "You fixed that latch last week," she said. "Not permanently," I told her. "Nothing in this building is fixed permanently. Things just agree to behave for a while." Her smile softened, and she said that sounded like me talking about people, not windows. I looked down at the jacket because eye contact had become a financial risk. She kept going, quieter now, telling me she knew when storms were coming because I always checked that latch before the rain got bad. I asked if she had surveillance equipment in the hallway. She said no, just insomnia and excellent powers of observation. Then she added, almost too casually, that she knew I played old jazz when a project was difficult and silence when the work was personal. There was no way to laugh that off. Not cleanly. The truth was, Mara had become part of my routine before I had ever allowed myself to want her as part of my life. Most mornings, I saw one of her theater flyers pinned crookedly above the mailboxes. Most evenings, there was some sign she had passed through. A strip of blue painter's tape stuck to her sleeve, a pencil behind her ear, a smudge of paint on her wrist, or one of her sarcastic notes about the elevator taped beside the buttons. Once, when the elevator had stalled between floors for 10 minutes, she had called through the doors to ask if anyone trapped inside had strong opinions about Greek tragedy. I had been the only one in there. By the time maintenance got me out, she was sitting cross-legged on the hallway floor, reading stage directions from a script like she was keeping me alive through culture. Afterward, she said she would have done the same for any neighbor. I had believed her because believing otherwise would have required courage I did not have. "So," I said finally, because one of us had to walk toward the thing hanging between us, "about last night." Mara looked at the mail table. Someone had left 3 pizza coupons and an electric bill addressed to a tenant who had moved out 2 years ago. "Which part?" she asked. "The part where the building tried to kill us, or the part where I borrowed your jacket and developed an unsettling attachment to it?" I said the part where she asked if I would miss her. She pressed her lips together, then gave one small nod, like she had known the question would come back for her in daylight. "I got an offer," she said. "A real one. Full-time stage management and design work. Minneapolis. Small theater company, but stable. Benefits, actual salary, the whole mythical adult package." I told her that sounded good, because it did, and because I was an idiot who answered facts before feelings. Mara's eyes flickered just slightly. "It is good," she said. "That's the problem." I leaned against my doorframe now, the jacket still in my hands. The hallway smelled like dust, coffee, and somebody's burnt toast. Mara looked more composed than she had the night before, but I could see the tension in the way she held her keys, each one pressed between her fingers like she needed something solid. She said she had 3 days to answer. Her sister thought she should say yes before they changed their mind. Her theater friends said she would be stupid not to go. Her bank account, apparently, had written a passionate letter in support of leaving. She said all of it with a smile, but the smile was working too hard. I asked what she wanted, and for once, Mara did not answer quickly. She looked past me into my apartment, where my desk was probably still covered with headphones, coffee rings, and old cassette labels, then back at the hallway between our doors. "I wanted to know if leaving always counts as brave," she said. That sentence found a place in me I had not offered it. I thought about my mother, who had treated every new city like a fresh start and every goodbye like bad weather. I thought about the woman I had almost married, who had packed her books into boxes and told me I was steady, kind, comfortable, and somehow made all 3 sound like reasons to go. I thought about how I had learned not to ask people to stay, because asking did not change the door closing. Mara was watching me, waiting, maybe not for advice, maybe for something more dangerous. I could have told her Minneapolis sounded like an opportunity. I could have told her she deserved stability. I could have been generous and distant and safe. Instead, I heard myself ask, "Are you hoping I'll tell you to go?" Her face changed so quickly I almost missed it. The sarcasm slipped, and underneath it was the same open fear from the courtyard. She looked down at my jacket, then back at me, and said, "I don't know. Maybe I was hoping you wouldn't make it that easy." Then she stepped away from my door before I could answer, like she had already said too much for one morning. She told me she had rehearsal that afternoon and started toward the stairs, but halfway there she turned back. "For the record," she said, trying for lightness and not quite reaching it, "your jacket is terrible at being emotionally unavailable." Then she disappeared down the stairwell, leaving me with the jacket in my hands and the horrible realization that she might be asking me for a reason to stay. I spent the rest of that day pretending to work while doing an impressive amount of staring at waveforms and understanding none of them. Usually, old audio calmed me down. There was something honest about damaged recordings, the crackle, the hiss, the missing pieces you had to respect instead of force. But that morning, every little pop in the track sounded like Mara's question coming back through static. "Would you miss me if I left?" By noon, I had opened the same file 6 times, adjusted nothing, and written exactly one useful note, which said, "Possible chair squeak at 0314. That was not exactly museum-quality restoration work. Around 2, my phone buzzed with a text from Mara that said, "Professional question. Do you know how to make a cursed soundboard less cursed?" I stared at it for longer than was reasonable, then typed and deleted 3 versions of an answer before settling on, "Depends. Is it haunted or just underfunded?" She replied, "Community theater." So both. That was how I ended up walking into the old Rialto Annex at 4:30 with a tool bag, headphones, and the dangerous feeling that I was not being invited only because of faulty equipment. The theater sat on a side street between a closed tailor shop and a bar that advertised live blues on Fridays. From outside, it looked like the kind of building people forgot until the lights came on. Inside, it smelled like sawdust, dust, paint, coffee, and panic, which I learned was the standard fragrance of live performance. Mara was on stage in black jeans, a fitted dark sweater, and boots, one pencil behind her ear and another in her hand, giving instructions to 3 people at once with the calm violence of someone who had not slept properly in years. She pointed to a ladder that needed moving, reminded an actor not to touch a prop door until it was reinforced, and told someone named Graham that if he lost the flashlight again, she would label him instead. Nobody argued. I stood near the back row watching her run the room, and for the first time, I understood that the woman across the hall was only one version of Mara Whitcomb. She spotted me before I said anything. Her face did not soften exactly because she was still in command, but something in her eyes warmed in a way that made me feel separated from the rest of the room. She came down the aisle toward me, stepping over coiled cables without looking, and said, "You came." I told her I had been promised a haunted soundboard, and I took professional haunting seriously. She handed me a clipboard, then immediately took it back like she had remembered I was a civilian. Sorry, reflex. I hand people tasks when I'm nervous. I asked if she was nervous, and she looked toward the stage, where a painted apartment wall leaned against sandbags and someone was arguing with a lamp. "I'm always nervous before final rehearsal," she said. "I just usually disguise it as competence." I wanted to tell her she was better at both than anyone I knew, but that felt too close to what I actually meant, so I asked where the cursed board was. The problem was not glamorous. It rarely is. A sound cue kept dropping out during a scene change, and every time Mara hit the button, the speakers gave a sad little click before silence swallowed the effect. She stood beside me in the booth while I checked the cables and opened the playback software. The booth was too small for 2 people who were pretending not to be aware of each other. Her shoulder brushed mine when she leaned over to point at the cue list, and she apologized even though neither of us moved farther away. I put on my headphones, replayed the bad cue, and heard the problem almost immediately. A corrupted file export layered over a bad connection, not a haunting unless ghosts had recently become interested in amateur file management. Mara watched me work without filling the silence, which I appreciated more than I expected. Most people got uncomfortable when I listened closely. They wanted to explain, hurry, defend, or apologize. Mara just stood there, hands folded around her pencil, trusting that I would hear what needed hearing. "You're different when you work," she said after a while. I kept my eyes on the levels and told her that was a polite way of saying I was usually disappointing. She did not laugh. She said, "No, usually I made jokes before anyone could see what I was thinking, but when I listened, I stopped hiding. That landed too directly, so I adjusted a cable that did not need adjusting." She leaned against the back wall of the booth and watched the stage through the glass. "You treat broken things like they're not wasting your time," she said. I told her audio files did not break on purpose. She looked at me then, and the double meaning was so obvious even I could not pretend I missed it. "People usually don't either," she said. The cue played cleanly a second later, filling the theater with the low rumble of fake thunder. Down on stage, someone cheered. Mara smiled like I had done something much bigger than fix a file. For the next hour, I stayed because there were 2 more cues, one buzzing monitor, and apparently no one in that building believed in labeling cables correctly. I told myself that staying was practical, but the truth was I liked being useful in her world. I liked seeing how people looked to her for answers. I liked how she moved through chaos without making anyone feel small. I liked the way she would pass behind me in the booth and lightly touch the back of my chair before squeezing through, as if that tiny warning was nothing. At one point, I noticed my jacket folded over the end of a row in the back of the theater. I knew it was mine because of the torn inside pocket and because my heart did something stupid when I saw it. Mara followed my gaze and said she had brought it by accident. I told her people usually did not accidentally bring men's jackets to rehearsal. She said stage managers carried emergency supplies, and apparently I had been categorized under weather-related equipment. Near the end of rehearsal, Mara's phone started buzzing on the booth counter. She glanced at it, and the color in her expression changed. She let it ring once, twice, then turned it over. I pretended not to notice, because pretending not to notice had become our building's unofficial language. A minute later, it buzzed again. This time, she picked it up and stepped just outside the booth, but the door did not close all the way. I heard only pieces, enough to know it was her sister, and enough to wish I had heard less. Mara said she understood it was a good offer. She said no, she was not being sentimental. She said Cincinnati was not a trap just because it was familiar. Then there was a longer silence, and when she spoke again, her voice had gone flat in that controlled way people use when they are trying not to sound hurt. "I know staying doesn't sound impressive to you," she said. "That doesn't mean everyone who stays is scared." I looked away from the cracked booth window and down at the soundboard like it needed me. It did not. The cue was fixed, the levels were clean. I had no technical reason to remain, and every personal reason felt dangerous. Mara came back in with her phone in her hand and a smile already built on her face, the kind of smile people use to keep questions away. I did not ask if she was okay. That would have invited the easy lie. Instead, I said the Thunder Q was now less haunted, but Graham was probably still a liability. She laughed once, grateful and tired, then rubbed both hands over her face. "Thank you for coming," she said. I told her any neighbor would have done it, and the second I said it, I hated myself for making it smaller. Mara looked at me for a long second, like she had heard the retreat inside the sentence. After rehearsal ended, people drifted out in groups, carrying costumes, coffee cups, and complaints about parking. The theater emptied slowly until only the ghost light remained on stage, glowing in the middle of all that fake furniture and real exhaustion. I packed my headphones into my bag, ready to do the noble thing and leave before the room became too honest. Mara was standing near the back row with my jacket over one arm. She did not hand it to me. She just held it there, thumb brushing the canvas near the cuff. When I said I should probably get out of her way, she gave me a look that stopped me before I reached the aisle. "Evan," she said, softer than she had spoken all afternoon, "the soundboard wasn't the only reason I asked you to come." Then she looked toward the empty stage, like whatever came next was easier to say to the dark than to my face, and I understood I was not leaving that theater untouched. The thing about an empty theater is that it does not feel empty in the same way a room does. A room goes quiet when people leave. A theater keeps the shape of everyone who was just there. The stage still held the fake apartment wall, the old sofa from whatever thrift store had donated its sadness, and a painted window that looked out onto nothing. The ghost light stood in the middle of it all like one small stubborn star. Mara walked down the aisle ahead of me, still carrying my jacket, and for once she did not fill the silence with instructions or jokes. I followed her because leaving would have been easier, and I was starting to understand that easy was the thing we both used when honest got too close. She stopped near the front row and sat on the edge of the stage, her boots resting against the carpeted step. I sat in the aisle seat across from her instead of beside her, mostly because I did not trust myself with distance anymore. Mara noticed, of course. She always noticed. She looked down at the space between us and said I had chosen the safest possible chair in the building. I told her it had good lumbar support. She gave me a tired smile, but it faded quickly. "I asked you here because I wanted to see if it felt different," she said. When I asked what she meant, she looked around the theater at the taped floor marks and the half-painted walls and the shadows tucked into the curtains. She said she had been walking through this place for weeks, trying to decide whether it was a chapter ending or a life she was being too proud to want. Then she looked at me and added that the apartment building had started to feel the same way. I did not know what to do with that, so naturally I tried to make it smaller. I said old buildings were manipulative and should not be trusted with major life decisions. Mara laughed softly, but her hands tightened around my jacket. "You keep doing that," she said, "turning things into jokes right when they're about to matter." There was no anger in her voice. That made it worse. Anger would have given me something to defend against. Gentleness just walked right in. I rubbed my palms against my jeans and admitted that jokes were cheaper than therapy. She nodded like she accepted the answer, but not the escape. "Last night, when I asked if you'd miss me," she said, "I wasn't trying to trap you. I know it probably sounded unfair." I told her it did not sound unfair. It sounded dangerous. She looked at me then, and the honesty in her face made the theater feel even more silent. Mara unfolded the jacket and slipped her arms into it. Not because she was cold, I was pretty sure, but because it gave her something to do while she said things she hated needing. The sleeves covered half her hands again. My jacket looked different on her, less worn out, like it had found a better purpose. She stared at the ghost light and said she was tired of being easy to admire from a distance. Her sister admired her ambition. Her friends admired her hustle. Directors admired how she could hold a production together with duct tape and caffeine, but admiration, she said, was not the same thing as being asked whether she was lonely. It was not the same thing as someone knowing she stood in the hallway for a few seconds before opening her own door, because sometimes going inside alone felt heavier than staying outside. I felt that sentence move through me slowly, finding every place I had pretended not to understand it. I told her I had noticed that. I did not mean to say it. It just came out, quiet and plain. Mara turned back to me. I said I noticed when she came home late and paused by her door. I noticed when she laughed too loudly in the elevator after bad rehearsals. I noticed when she bought oranges and forgot to eat them. I noticed when she taped new theater flyers over old ones because she hated taking anything down before it was finished. Her face changed as I spoke. Not into surprise exactly, but into something more fragile, like she had hoped and feared being known in equal measure. I should have stopped there. Instead, I kept going because apparently the safe chair had failed me. I told her I noticed the light under her door on nights when the building was quiet, and I had wondered more than once if I should knock, but I never did because neighbors were allowed to care only up to a certain line, and I had become very good at respecting lines I secretly wanted to cross. Mara's eyes shone in the dim theater. She looked down at the jacket sleeves and said, "That's why I asked." I waited. She took a breath and told me she had been asking herself whether anyone would really miss her if she left, not in a polite tenant group chat way, not in a we should grab coffee before you go way, but in the private way that makes a place feel less replaceable. She said Minneapolis was a good offer and a sane offer, and probably the kind of thing she should have said yes to immediately. But every time she imagined packing, she kept seeing my door across from hers. She kept thinking about the hallway window that only behaved after I fixed it, the bad jazz through the wall, the way I carried groceries like I was personally responsible for gravity. She laughed at herself then and wiped under one eye before any tear could become official. "I sound ridiculous," she said. I told her she sounded like someone trying to tell the truth without bleeding on the carpet. That made her look at me for a long time. Then she asked why I never said things like that until someone was halfway gone. I could have pretended I did not understand. I could have given her the polished version, the one where I said I respected people's choices and believed in letting them grow. It would not even have been entirely false. But Mara was sitting there in my jacket in a theater full of unfinished rooms, and I did not want to give her another clean lie. So I told her about my mother. Not all of it, just enough. How she moved whenever life got tight, how each city was supposed to fix what the last one had broken, how I learned young that asking to stay in one place made adults look at you like you were being selfish. Then I told her about Lena, the woman I almost built a life with, who said I was steady and kind and comfortable, and somehow made comfortable sound like a waiting room she could not stand sitting in anymore. Mara listened the way she had listened in the sound booth, without rushing to patch the silence. That might have been why I kept talking. I admitted that after Lena left, I promised myself I would never be the man standing in a doorway asking someone to choose him when they already had one foot out. I got good at helping people pack emotionally before they even asked. I made things easy. I told myself it was generous. Mara's voice was soft when she said, "Sometimes easy feels a lot like being let go." I looked up at her and there it was. Not accusation, recognition. The kind that does not let you hide behind your better intentions. I said I knew, and hearing myself say it made the truth worse because it meant I had known for a while. She slid off the edge of the stage and came closer, stopping just in front of my safe chair. The jacket cuff brushed her knuckles as she folded her arms. She asked if I thought wanting someone made their life smaller. I said no too quickly, then corrected myself. I said I thought wanting someone gave them the power to leave with more of you than you meant to hand over. Mara's expression softened so much it nearly hurt to look at. She said maybe that was true, but pretending not to want them did not protect the part they already had. The theater seemed to narrow around us. I could smell dust, paint, and the faint, clean scent of my jacket warmed by her skin. I wanted to stand. I wanted to touch her sleeve. I wanted to say, stay, and I wanted to be the kind of man who could survive whatever answer came after. Instead, I asked what she wanted me to say. It was not my bravest moment, but it was honest. Mara looked down, and when she smiled this time, it was small and sad. She said she did not want me to make her decision. She did not want me to turn into a reason she blamed later, and she did not want to be talked out of a future she had worked too hard to earn. Then she looked back at me, and her voice went quiet enough that I had to lean forward to catch it. but I also don't want to be so easy to release that nobody even reaches for me. That sentence took every noble excuse I had and left it on the floor between us. I stood then, slowly, not because I knew what I was doing, but because sitting felt like another form of running. We were close enough that if I lifted my hand, I could have touched the frayed edge of my jacket on her shoulder. I did not. Not yet. She looked up at me, waiting, and I realized she was giving me a chance to say something that mattered before fear edited it down. I told her I would miss her. The words came out rougher than I expected. Mara blinked once. I said I would miss hearing her keys in the hall. I would miss her terrible elevator notes and her dead basil and the way she made the whole building feel less like a place people pass through. I would miss knowing she was across the hall even on nights we did not speak. Her eyes filled, and I almost stopped because her face was too much. But then she whispered, "If I stayed, would you ever believe it was because I wanted to?" And I hated myself a little because the answer did not come fast enough. The worst part was that I knew the answer. I knew it while Mara was standing in front of me in that empty theater, wearing my jacket, asking if I would ever believe she stayed because she wanted to. The answer was yes, or at least I wanted it to be yes. I wanted to be the kind of man who could say it immediately, who could take one step closer and tell her that if she stayed, I would spend every day trying not to make her regret being brave. But old fear is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet and reasonable and dressed up as maturity. It told me she had a real offer, a real salary, a real future in another city, and I was just the man across the hall with a cracked coffee mug and a history of making people comfortable before they left anyway. So instead of answering fast enough, I hesitated. It was maybe 2 seconds, maybe 3. It was enough. Mara saw it. Of course she did. She gave me one small nod, the kind people give when they have received an answer they were hoping not to get, and she stepped back before I could fix it. I told her I was not saying no, which was a terrible sentence because nobody had asked me a yes or no question out loud. She said she knew, but her voice had already changed. It had gone practical. Stage manager, practical. The version of Mara that could tape over a broken prop, redirect a panicking actor, and keep moving, because stopping would make the hurt visible. She took off my jacket and handed it to me with both hands, careful and polite, like it had never been wrapped around her while she asked me to admit she mattered. I wanted to refuse it. I wanted to say, keep it, keep me, keep whatever part of this makes you feel less alone. Instead, I took it, because apparently my hands were braver at receiving than my mouth was at asking. The next day, I became very busy in the way cowards become busy. I answered emails I had ignored for a week. I organized old cassette labels by date. I cleaned the filter in my coffee machine, even though it had not requested spiritual renewal. Every time footsteps passed my door, I froze like the hallway had become a courtroom. Around noon, I heard Mara leave. Her keys jingled once, then stopped, and I imagined her standing there the way she sometimes did before going, gathering herself in that narrow strip of space between our doors. I did not open mine. I told myself she needed room to decide without my presence pressing against her. That sounded noble enough to almost believe. By 3, I had convinced myself that staying quiet was the generous thing. By 4, I hated myself for being so generous. The jacket hung over the back of my chair like evidence. It still held faint traces of the theater, dust and cold air and Mara, and every time I looked at it, I remembered her question arriving in that soft voice under the ghost light. If I stayed, would you ever believe it was because I wanted to? I tried to work through it, but the audio file in front of me was a recording of a woman from 1972 telling her husband she missed him while he was overseas, and that felt personally aggressive from the archive. I closed the project, I stood, picked up the jacket, walked to my door, opened it, and looked across the hall at 3C. For 1 second, I almost knocked. Then I pictured Mara opening the door tired and guarded, and I pictured myself saying something too careful again, and fear made the decision before I could. I hung the jacket on her doorknob and went back inside like a man returning a borrowed item, not the one piece of proof that I had held warmth and handed it back without courage. She found me by the mailboxes that evening. I had waited until I thought the hallway would be empty because apparently I had become a person who timed his mail retrieval like a bank robbery. I was sorting through junk flyers and one real bill when the stairwell door opened behind me. I knew it was Mara before I turned around. There was a rhythm to the way she came in, quick but tired, like she had been carrying the day by its collar. She stopped beside the mail table, and I saw my jacket folded over her arm. Not worn, folded. Somehow, that was worse. She said my name, not angry, not soft, just flat enough to make me look at her. I told her I had meant to return it properly. She gave a small laugh and said leaving it on her doorknob was proper if I was delivering dry cleaning or avoiding a woman who had asked him one honest question too many. I deserved that, so I did not defend myself. Mara looked at the mailboxes instead of at me and said she understood what I was trying to do, that I probably thought silence was kindness, that if I did not say too much, I could not become the reason she stayed, and if she left, at least I would have the comfort of pretending I had not asked for anything. Hearing my own logic in her voice made it sound less noble and more cruel. I told her I did not want to make her future smaller. She turned then, and there was hurt in her face, but it was controlled, held carefully at the edges. "You keep talking about my future like you're not allowed to be in it," she said. I had no answer for that. Or worse, I had one, but it was ugly. I was afraid I would want to be in it more than she wanted me there. Mara set the jacket on the mail table between us. She said she was not asking me to choose Minneapolis or Cincinnati for her. She was not asking me to rescue her from ambition or become some romantic excuse she could blame in 5 years if life got hard. She was asking whether what had been happening between us was real enough to name. Then her voice shifted, just slightly. Because care without courage still feels like rejection, Evan. That one went straight through me. I looked at the jacket, at the worn collar, at the sleeve she had folded too neatly, and I understood that I had tried to protect her from pressure by giving her absence. I had tried not to trap her and had made her feel released instead. There were so many ways to abandon someone while standing 3 feet away. I told her I was scared. It was not impressive, but it was true. Mara's expression softened for half a second, then steadied again. She said she was scared too, but she was done having entire conversations with the space under my door. Tomorrow night was her final rehearsal before she had to answer the offer. After that, she was sending the email one way or another. She picked up the jacket and pressed it into my hands. Not gently, not harshly, just firmly enough that I had to take it. "If you have anything real to say," she told me, "you know where the theater is." Then she walked past me toward the stairs instead of her apartment, leaving me beside the mailboxes with my jacket in my hands and the terrible knowledge that this time, if she left, it would not be because I had nothing to say. It would be because I was too afraid to say it. I almost did not go. That is the part I wish I could make sound better, but the truth is not always flattering when you tell it from the safe side of fear. I spent the next day building arguments against myself with the skill of a man who had practiced losing before the fight started. Mara had a real offer. Mara had earned that offer. Mara did not need a neighbor with unresolved abandonment issues walking into her final rehearsal and turning her life into some emotional negotiation. By 6, I had convinced myself that staying home was respectful. By 6:30, I was standing in my kitchen holding the jacket and realizing respect had started to sound a lot like cowardice. The apartment was too quiet without the possibility of her footsteps across the hall. Every small sound felt wrong. The fridge humming, traffic below, the old pipes complaining like they knew I was about to disappoint myself. At 7, I picked up my keys, put on the jacket, then took it off because it felt like hiding inside evidence. I carried it instead. The Rialto Annex looked different at night when I was not arriving as the helpful neighbor with a tool bag and a technical excuse. The front doors were propped open with a sandbag, and warm light spilled onto the sidewalk in a thin rectangle. Inside, the lobby was empty except for a stack of programs, a dead plant, and a poster with Mara's name printed small under stage management. I stood there staring at that name longer than I should have. Mara Whitcomb. It looked official on paper, but I knew the parts paper never showed. The hallway pause before she opened her door, the orange peels she left in a bowl and forgot, the way she made jokes right before honesty could catch her. From deeper inside the theater, I heard voices, then applause, then the uneven scrape of chairs as people began leaving. I stepped aside as actors came through the lobby in clusters, laughing too loudly with the tired relief of people who had survived something together. No one stopped me. No one asked why I was there. That made it harder, somehow, because the only person I had to answer to was myself. I found Mara after everyone else had gone. She was on stage beside a half-packed crate of props, wearing black jeans, a faded sweater, and my jacket over her shoulders like she had put it on without thinking. The ghost light was not on yet, so the stage held a softer kind of darkness, with work lights casting long shadows across the fake apartment wall. She was wrapping a chipped ceramic vase in newspaper, moving carefully, methodically, like if she packed one fragile thing at a time, she could keep herself from breaking. She did not see me at first. For a few seconds, I just watched her in the place where she was most herself, and I understood something that should have been obvious sooner. I did not want to keep Mara from becoming more. I wanted to know the version of her who became more. I wanted the tired texts after long rehearsals, the bad hotel coffee complaints, the opening night nerves, the ordinary proof that leaving and being loved did not have to cancel each other out. She looked up when my shoe creaked against the aisle, her hands stilled around the newspaper. For 1 second, all the strength left her face, and I saw the question she was too proud to ask again. Then the stage manager returned just enough for her to say, "The soundboard behaved tonight." I nodded like that was why I had come, because old habits do not die cleanly. "Good," I said. "I'd hate to lose you to a haunted queue system." Mara looked at the jacket in my hands, then down at the one she was wearing, and a faint, sad smile crossed her face. "I borrowed it again," she said. "Apparently, I have a problem." I stepped closer, stopping at the edge of the stage instead of climbing up right away. "So do I told her. Mine is pretending I'm being careful when I'm actually just scared." That got through. Mara set the vase down slowly. The theater seemed to hold still around us, all those fake walls and painted doors, waiting for someone to finally say something real. I climbed the short steps onto the stage, and for once, I did not look for the safest chair or the easiest joke. I stood a few feet from her, close enough to see the shine in her eyes, but far enough that she could decide what to do with my presence. I told her I had spent most of my life trying not to be the reason anyone felt trapped. I told her I had confused letting people choose with making sure they never knew what I wanted. I said that when she asked if I would miss her, the answer had been yes before she finished the question. Yes in the hallway, yes in the courtyard, yes every night I heard her come home and felt the building settle around the fact that she was back. Mara pressed her lips together, but she did not interrupt. She just listened, and that gave me the courage to stop sounding polished. "I would miss you in ways that would make this building feel stupid," I said, and she gave a watery laugh that almost undid me. I kept going before I could run out of nerve. I told her I would miss the notes she taped to the elevator, and the way she said my name like she was calling me out of hiding, and the terrible singing through the courtyard window. I would miss knowing she was 6 feet away even when we did not talk. I would miss the version of myself who existed when she was near, because that man was still scared but not numb. Mara looked down then, one hand tightening around the sleeve of my jacket. I said I did not want her to stay because she felt guilty, and I did not want her to leave just because everyone had taught her that distance was the only proof of courage. Then I said the truest thing I had carried into that theater. I don't want to be another quiet place you almost stayed. I want to be a reason you know you're wanted. For a while, Mara did not move. I thought maybe I had said it too late, which would have been fair. Then she took one breath, then another, and said she had written the acceptance email that afternoon. My chest tightened, but I made myself stay still. She said she had not sent it. Not because she expected me to fix her life, and not because she wanted a speech dramatic enough to excuse fear, but because every version of the future felt false until she knew whether the thing between us had a name. I needed to know if leaving would be freedom, she said, or if it was just me running before someone had the chance to ask me to stay. I told her I was asking now, but not the way I would have before. Not as a demand, not as a test. I said I wanted her to choose the future that made her feel alive, and I wanted to be honest enough that she could decide with all the facts, including the inconvenient one that I was already in love with, the woman across the hall. Mara closed her eyes at that. When she opened them, the stage lights caught the tears she had been refusing to let fall. She said my name once, softly, and this time it did not sound like a warning. It sounded like relief arriving carefully. She stepped closer and touched the front of my shirt, not pulling me, just making sure I was there. "You should have said that sooner," she whispered. I told her I knew. She said I was an idiot. I told her I knew that too. A small laugh escaped her, and then she leaned forward and rested her forehead lightly against my shoulder. I held still for half a second, not because I did not want to hold her, but because I finally understood that wanting did not give me permission to rush. When her hand curled into the fabric of my shirt, I put my arms around her. It was not dramatic. No music swelled. No audience gasped from the dark. It was just Mara standing in an unfinished set, wearing my jacket, and me finally brave enough to let her feel how much I did not want the space between our doors to become a memory. When she pulled back, she did not step away. She looked at me with the kind of tenderness that felt both new and like it had been waiting there for months. "I still might go," she said. My heart hurt, but it did not collapse. I nodded. "I know." She searched my face, maybe looking for disappointment, pressure, old panic dressed as love. I tried not to give her any of those. I told her I did not want truth, only if it got me the answer I wanted. Mara's expression softened, and she reached into the pocket of my jacket, pulling out a folded scrap of paper I recognized as one of her rehearsal notes. She had written 2 words on it in black marker. "Ask honestly." She looked embarrassed when I saw it, but she did not hide it. "I wrote that before rehearsal," she said. "For me." I took the paper gently and gave it back to her. "Keep it," I said. "I'm going to need reminders." She smiled then, tired and real, and for a moment the whole theater felt less like an ending place. Mara said she had until morning to send the email. She wanted to think, not alone this time, but not trapped either. I asked what she needed. She looked around at the stage, at the packed props, at the dim rows of empty seats, then back at me. "Walk me home," she said. "And don't turn this into goodbye before it has to be." So I picked up the second jacket, the one I had carried there like a backup heart, and followed her out of the theater into the cold night. She still might go. I still might lose the daily miracle of her across the hall. But her hand brushed mine once on the sidewalk, then stayed there, and for the first time, the truth was walking home with us instead of waiting for one of us to be brave enough to open the door. We walked home without solving anything, which turned out to be the first honest thing we did right. The city was cold enough that our breath showed under the streetlights, and Mara kept my jacket wrapped around herself while I carried the spare one like a man who had misunderstood weather on a symbolic level. Neither of us talked for the first block. Her hand stayed in mine, not tightly, but deliberately, and every time her thumb moved against my knuckle, I had to remind myself that honesty was not the same thing as certainty. I wanted a clean answer. I wanted her to turn under a streetlight and say she was staying, that the job did not matter, that the hallway and my stupid jazz and my broken coffee machine were enough to rewrite her future. But love, if it was going to be real between us, could not begin with me needing her future to shrink around my fear. So, when she finally said she did not know what she was going to do, I told her the truth. I did not know either, but I wanted to know with her. Back at the building, we did not go upstairs right away. We sat on the front steps beneath the weak yellow awning, the one that leaked from the left corner and had been threatening to collapse since February. Mara tucked her knees close and said she hated that the mature answer was not obvious. I told her mature answers were usually just confusing answers wearing better shoes. That made her laugh, but softly. Then we talked the way people talk when there is no performance left. She told me what Minneapolis meant. Health insurance, real money, a theater that would put her name on contracts instead of volunteer schedules, a chance to stop proving she was serious. I told her what Cincinnati had become without me admitting it. Not just a city, not just an old apartment, but the first place in years where I had started listening for someone to come home. She looked at me when I said that, and there was no victory in her face, no satisfaction at finally hearing it, just tenderness, which was harder to survive. By the time we went upstairs, neither of us had decided anything except that we were done pretending the decision belonged to only one of us. Mara stopped between our doors, the same 6 feet of hallway that had held months of almosts, and said she needed to make a call in the morning before sending the email. I asked if she wanted me to stay while she did it. She smiled a little and said not in the room because she still had a spine and a reputation to protect, but maybe across the hall with coffee ready. I told her I could do that. Then she started to take off the jacket, and I caught her wrist gently before I could overthink it. I said she could keep it for the night. Mara looked at my hand around her wrist, then at me, and asked if I was sure. I told her it was terrible at being emotionally unavailable anyway. She smiled then, the real smile, and said goodnight like it was not goodbye. The next morning, I made coffee strong enough to legally qualify as a warning. I heard Mara moving across the hall, heard her pacing, heard her stop, and then heard her voice through the wall, low and controlled. I could not make out the words, and for once, I did not try. That was her future on the other side of the door, and I had finally learned there was a difference between listening and invading. 20 minutes later, she knocked. She was still wearing my jacket over a white t-shirt and jeans, her hair messy, her face tired but clear. She stepped inside, took the coffee I handed her, and said she had asked them whether the start date was flexible and whether some design work could be done remotely until the next production cycle. My heart did something reckless, but I stayed quiet. She said they were surprised, then interested, then annoyingly reasonable. She could go for the first 6 weeks, come back for 2, then split time for the first season while she decided what the job could become. I asked what that meant, and Mara leaned against my counter, looking both terrified and proud. She said it meant she was not staying because she was afraid to leave, and she was not leaving because she was afraid to stay. She was choosing the bigger life, but she was done pretending the bigger life had to exclude being loved. I did not move for a second because I did not trust my face. Then I crossed the kitchen and stopped in front of her, giving her every chance to step away. She did not. She set down the coffee, touched the front of my shirt, and told me I looked like a man trying very hard not to fall apart before breakfast. I said I had a brand to maintain. She said my brand was emotionally constipated kindness, and I told her that sounded like a podcast nobody should sponsor. She laughed, and then I kissed her. Softly, carefully, not as a reward for staying, and not as a promise that distance would be easy. It was just the first honest kiss of a future neither of us had finished designing. The weeks after that were not cinematic in the way people expect love stories to be. There were spreadsheets, there were travel dates, theater contracts, rental logistics, and one argument about whether long distance counted if one person still lived across the hall part of the month. Mara went to Minneapolis, and I missed her exactly as badly as I had known I would. But missing her was different after the truth. It was not the hollow kind, where you wonder if you imagined your importance. It was full of proof. Late-night calls from backstage corridors, photos of terrible hotel lamps, voice messages where she complained about directors who used the word vision too much, and one package containing my jacket with a note that said, "Temporary return. Smells too much like you." Very distracting. I sent it back 2 days later with coffee beans in the pocket and a note that said, "For emergency courage." Months later, I visited during a rehearsal in Minneapolis. I sat in the back row of a small black box theater while Mara moved through the space with a headset, a pencil, and that same dangerous competence that had first undone me at the Rialto. My jacket hung on the back of her chair near the sound table. During a break, she caught me looking at it and raised one eyebrow like she knew exactly what I was thinking. Later, when she handed it to me, I found something in the inside pocket, her old apartment key from Cincinnati. She said she kept it there because it reminded her that home was not always the place you refused to leave. Sometimes it was the person who finally learned how to ask honestly and the person who was brave enough not to run from the answer. So yes, I would have missed her if she left. I did miss her. I still do, sometimes, even when she is only gone for a week, even when I know exactly when she is coming back. But the question was never only whether I would miss her. The real question was whether I would let her know she was wanted before silence made the decision for both of us. If you have ever been afraid to ask someone to stay, or if someone once made you feel missed before you were gone, tell me in the comments. I would really like to know what happened. And if this story stayed with you, leave a like, subscribe, and come back for the next one. There are some questions that change a life the moment someone is finally brave enough to answer them.